A mysterious Belgian Malinois appears at the Riverdale Police Station, urgently trying to communicate with Officer James Wilson. The dog's persistence leads to an astonishing discovery that will change multiple lives forever. What secret is this? Determined canine trying to reveal, and why did he choose this specific officer? The truth behind the dog's desperate attempts to get help will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. The bitter spring wind whipped through the empty streets of Riverdale as Officer James Wilson gathered his belongings at the end of another mundane shift. The fluorescent lights of the North Riverdale Police Precinct cast harsh shadows across his desk, where a stack of unfinished paperwork reminded him of how far he'd fallen. 3 years ago, he'd been leading high-stakes SWAT operations. Now, he spent his days writing traffic citations and responding to noise complaints. James ran his fingers through his graying hair, remembering the incident that had cost him his position on the tactical team. The weight of that day still pressed heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of split-second decisions and irreversible consequences. He'd chosen a safer path afterward, trading in his tactical gear for a standard patrol uniform, but the ghosts of his past never truly left him. The empty parking lot greeted him as he pushed through the heavy glass doors, his breath visible. In the chilly evening air, most of his colleagues had already headed home, leaving only a few patrol cars scattered across the asphalt like lonely sentinels. The setting sun painted the clouds in shades of purple and orange, a beautiful sight that James barely noticed anymore. Movement caught his attention from the corner of his eye. There, sitting perfectly still near the precinct's chain-link fence, was a Belgian Malinois. The dog's coat was well maintained, its intelligent eyes fixed intently on James with an unsettling focus. Something about the animal's posture seemed almost military, training evident in every line of its body. "Go on, get out of here!" James called out, waving his hand dismissively. The dog's ears perked forward, but it didn't move. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if contemplating James's words before deliberately ignoring them. Over the next week, the dog became a fixture in James's daily routine. He'd spot it trailing his patrol car at a distance, always maintaining perfect form even as it followed him across town. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of it in his rearview mirror, a phantom shadow that appeared and disappeared with surprising stealth for an animal its size. The other officers started to notice. Rachel Martinez, his usual patrol partner, couldn't help but comment as they returned to the station one particularly cold morning. "Looks like you've got yourself an admirer, Wilson," she said, nodding toward the dog, who sat alertly near their usual parking spot. "That Malinois has been shadowing you for days. Maybe he's trying to tell you something." James tried to brush off her words, but something about the dog's behavior nagged at his instincts. He'd worked with canine units before, back in his SWAT days. This wasn't the random wandering of a stray. This was purposeful, trained behavior. The dog was trying to communicate something specific, and with each passing day, its attempts grew more urgent. That evening, as James approached his car, the pattern finally broke. Instead of maintaining its usual distance, the dog darted forward, planting itself directly in front of his vehicle. Its posture was rigid, mission-focused, every muscle conveying determination. James tried to shoo it away, but the animal stood its ground, letting out a high-pitched whine that carried unmistakable urgency. When James took a step closer, the dog backed up several paces before stopping, its eyes never leaving his face. Then it moved forward again, gently tugging at his pant leg before turning toward the Pine Grove trails that bordered the station's property. The meaning was clear. "Follow me." James checked his watch, noting the fading daylight. Every instinct, from his tactical training, screamed that something was wrong. The dog's behavior was too deliberate, too focused. This wasn't a coincidence or a stray seeking attention. This was a trained animal with a mission. His radio crackled at his hip, reminding him that he should be heading home. But as he watched the dog look back at him expectantly, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the pull of genuine purpose. With a deep sigh, he retrieved his flashlight from the patrol car and checked his sidearm. "All right, Shadow," he said quietly, the name coming to him naturally as he observed the dog's dark coat in the growing dusk. "Show me what's so important." The dense trees of Pine Grove trails loomed ahead, their shadows growing longer as the sun continued its descent behind the Riverdale skyline. James kept his flashlight beam steady, following Shadow's purposeful trot through the winding paths. The Belgian Malinois moved with unwavering certainty, occasionally glancing back to ensure James maintained pace. The evening air grew colder as they ventured deeper into the wooded area, the sounds of city traffic gradually fading into nature's whispers. James's boots crunched over fallen branches and early spring vegetation, his trained eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of disturbance. Something about Shadow's demeanor reminded him of search and rescue operations he'd witnessed during his SWAT days. The focused intensity, the deliberate pace, the careful checking to ensure his human companion followed. A sudden gust of wind carried an unusual scent, causing Shadow to freeze mid-stride. The dog's ears pricked forward, nose testing the air with renewed intensity. James observed the subtle shift in the animal's behavior, noting how its muscles tensed beneath the sleek, dark coat. 15 years of police work had taught him to trust these moments, when instinct and training merged to signal that something was fundamentally wrong. The beam of his flashlight caught something unusual against the forest floor, a piece of fabric too bright and new to be natural debris. James approached carefully, maintaining tactical awareness of his surroundings as he crouched to examine the discovery. The material was a vibrant red, synthetic, the kind used in expensive hiking gear, more telling with the straight, clean edges. This hadn't been torn by branches or weather, it had been cut. Shadow whined softly, pawing at the ground near the fabric. James swept his flashlight beam in a wider arc, revealing more signs of recent human activity. Broken twigs at an unnatural height, displaced leaf litter forming a subtle trail, and most concerning, what appeared to be fresh shoe prints pressed into a patch of mud. The impressions were clear enough to show a distinctive pattern: combat. Boots, size 11 or 12, heading deeper into the woods. The setting sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving them in the growing darkness of early evening. Protocol dictated that James should radio for backup, wait for additional units before proceeding further into an unknown situation. But Shadow was already moving forward, his body language conveying an urgency that spoke of limited time. Their path led them away from the main trails, weaving through increasingly dense vegetation. James noticed more signs of passage. Recently, broken branches, scattered equipment that spoke of hasty movement. A discarded water bottle caught his attention, the label showing it had been purchased from the convenience store near the station. The receipt was still wrapped around it, dated just 2 days ago. The terrain began to slope downward, leading them into a natural depression that local kids called the Devil's Bowl. Ancient trees crowded together here, their twisted roots creating natural barriers and hidden spaces. Shadow's pace quickened, his movements becoming more animated as they approached what appeared to be a fallen oak. The massive tree had created a natural shelter where it fell, its upturned roots forming a wall that rose nearly 15 feet into the air. James's flashlight beam caught a glint of metal beneath the tangled roots, something that didn't belong in this natural setting. Shadow darted forward, squeezing through a narrow gap between the roots and disappeared from view. A moment later, His urgent barking echoed from within the hidden space. Approaching cautiously, James detected fresh tool marks on some of the roots. Someone had deliberately widened the natural opening, creating a concealed entrance. The bark around the gap showed signs of recent contact, dark scuff marks that could have been left by equipment or clothing. The gap was tight, but manageable. James had to remove his utility belt to squeeze through, pushing his flashlight ahead first to illuminate the space beyond. The beam revealed a crude chamber carved into the earth beneath the fallen tree. The walls had been reinforced with salvaged lumber, creating a space roughly 8 feet square. The air inside was stale, carrying the unmistakable scent of fear and human occupation. Shadow stood in the center of the space, poring at what appeared to be a trap door set into the earthen floor. The dog's whines had taken on a different quality now, not just urgent, but distressed. James approached carefully, noting the heavy-duty padlock securing the door. This was no teenage hideout or homeless shelter. This was something far more sinister. The sound that made James's blood run cold came so faintly he almost missed it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A muffled whimper from beneath the wooden door. Shadow's whining intensified, his paws scratching desperately at the edges of the trap door. There was someone down there, someone alive. James keyed his radio, his voice tight with controlled urgency. As he called in his location and findings, the response was immediate. Units were already en route, following his GPS signal. But the whimper came again, weaker this time, and James knew they couldn't wait. The padlock was high quality, but the hasp securing it to the door was cheap hardware store material. 3 well-placed shots from his service weapon, the sound deafening in the confined space, and the hasp tore free. Shadow backed away just enough to let James lift the heavy door, then immediately pressed forward, nose leading the way into the darkness below. The beam of James's flashlight revealed a crude ladder leading down into a deeper chamber. The space below appeared to be part of an old storm drain system, long abandoned by the city, but repurposed for something horrible. The air that rose from the opening carried the metallic scent of blood. James descended carefully, every sense alert for danger. The chamber below was larger than the one above, stretching away into darkness in both directions. Shadow had already moved to a pile of blankets in one corner, gently nosing at a still form that lay there. The flashlight beam revealed a young woman, bound and gagged, her face pale and drawn with fear and exhaustion. Her eyes squinted against the sudden light, tears leaving clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. James recognized her immediately. Jennifer Chen, the medical student whose disappearance had made headlines 3 days ago. Moving quickly but carefully, James removed the gag and began working on the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. Shadow pressed close, offering warmth and comfort as Jennifer began to shake with delayed shock and relief. Above them, the sound of approaching sirens filtered down through the open trapdoor. "He'll be back soon," Jennifer managed to whisper, her voice raw from dehydration and fear. "He always comes at night, always wears a mask, but his hands..." She stopped, shuddering. His hands had burns, old ones, all over them. James's mind raced through recent case files, connecting pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving. 3 months ago, they'd investigated a suspicious fire at the old paper mill. The primary suspect had been a former employee with a history of violence, but they'd never found enough evidence to make charges stick. The man had disappeared shortly after questioning, his distinctive burn-scarred hands the most notable feature in his description. Shadow suddenly went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. James heard it too, footsteps above, moving with practiced stealth toward the hidden entrance. Jennifer's eyes widened in terror, her fingers clutching at James's uniform sleeve. Making a quick decision, James helped Jennifer to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved deeper into the storm drain system. Shadow took point, leading them away from the approaching danger. The dog's night vision and keen senses would be their best chance at finding another way out. The sound of cursing erupted above them, followed by the crash of furniture being overturned. Their escape had been discovered. James clicked off his flashlight, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness as they moved as quickly as Jennifer's condition would allow. Shadow's pale coat was just visible ahead, a ghost-like guide in the blackness. The storm drain system was a maze, but Shadow moved through it with purpose, as if he'd mapped these tunnels during his days of searching. Left, right, straight for 50 yards, then right again, each turn taking them further from the sounds of rage that echoed behind them. A fresh breeze suddenly touched James's face, carrying the scent of pine needles and early spring. Shadow had led them to another exit, this one opening into a drainage culvert near Riverdale Lake. As they helped Jennifer climb out into the cool night air, the sound of police sirens grew closer, approaching from multiple directions. Shadow stood guard as James radioed their new position, his ears constantly moving, tracking sounds only he could hear. Jennifer sagged against a tree, exhaustion finally overtaking her as the reality of rescue sank in. The dog moved to her side, offering silent comfort while James secured the area. Within minutes, the quiet lakeside exploded with activity as tactical teams arrived, their bright lights cutting through the darkness. Medical personnel rushed to attend to Jennifer, while other officers began setting up a perimeter, preparing to sweep the drain system. As emergency teams swarmed the area around Riverdale Lake, James watched Shadow's behavior change. The Belgian Malinois had moved away from Jennifer, who was now safely in the care of paramedics, and stood rigidly at attention, his gaze fixed on the storm drain entrance. The dog's posture spoke of unfinished business. This wasn't over. Chief Thomas Parker strode through the organized chaos, his weathered face tight with concern as he approached James. "Wilson, tactical teams ready to go in, but before they do, tell me exactly what we're dealing with here." James quickly recounted the evening's events, from Shadow's persistent behavior to the discovery of the underground chamber. As he described the hidden room and Jennifer's condition, recognition flashed across the chief's face. "Burns on his ends," Parker muttered, pulling out his phone and quickly scrolling through files. The paper mill case, Robert Thorne. He held up the screen, showing a booking photo from 3 months ago. A gaunt-faced man with cold eyes and a distinctive scar running along his jawline. Rachel Martinez joined them, her notebook already in hand. Thorne worked maintenance at the mill for 15 years before the layoffs. After the fire, we found evidence he'd been living in the abandoned sections of the building, but he vanished before we could bring him in for questioning. Shadow's sudden growl cut through their discussion. The dog's attention was still locked on the drain entrance, his muscles trembling with contained energy. James had seen that look before, during his SWAT days. It was the look of a K9 that had scented its target. The radio crackled with urgent updates, teams sweeping the underground. Chamber had found more than Jennifer's prison. The space contained evidence linking to other disappearances, personal items belonging to at least 3 other women who had vanished from surrounding counties over the past year. Chief Parker's face hardened as he listened to the reports. This just became a multi-jurisdictional manhunt. "Martinez, coordinate with county. I want every available unit on this. Wilson..." He paused, studying James thoughtfully. "That dog seems to have a nose for this case. Think you can work with him?" Before James could respond, Shadow darted forward several steps, then looked back expectantly. The message was clear. He had a trail, and he was ready to follow it. James felt adrenaline surge through his system, muscle memory from his tactical days taking over. "We'll take point," James said, checking his weapon and radio. Shadow seems to know these tunnels. If Thorn's still down there, we might have our best shot at finding him before he disappears again. The tactical team fell in behind them as they approached the drain entrance. Shadow led the way, his movements precise and controlled. The dog's training was evident in every step. This was no ordinary stray. Someone had invested considerable time in developing his skills. The tunnel system was a maze of interconnected passages, some barely large enough to crawl through, others expanding into chambers large enough to stand. Shadow moved with purpose, leading them deeper into the labyrinth. The tactical team's lights created shifting shadows that danced across the curved walls, transforming familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound echoing through the tunnels. Their footsteps, despite attempts at stealth, seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. Shadow paused at each intersection, nose working the air currents before choosing a direction. The dog suddenly froze, his entire body becoming preternaturally still. James signaled the team to halt, straining his senses. At first, there was nothing but the ambient sounds of the drainage system. Then he heard it, the faint scrape of metal on concrete coming from somewhere ahead. Shadow's ears swiveled, tracking the sound. Without warning, the dog shot forward, disappearing around a bend in the tunnel. The sound of running footsteps erupted ahead, followed by a shout of surprise and pain. James and the tactical team rushed forward, weapons ready. They rounded the corner to find Shadow locked in a standoff with Robert Thorn. The man was pressed against the tunnel wall, a makeshift weapon, what appeared to be a sharpened piece of pipe, held out defensively. Blood ran down his arm where Shadow's initial attack had caught him. "Call off your dog," Thorn snarled, his eyes wild in the tactical lights. "Call him off or I'll put him down." The scarred hands gripping. The pipe trembled slightly. Whether from fear or rage was unclear. Shadow maintained his position, muscles coiled and ready to strike. The dog's growl reverberated through the tunnel, a sound that spoke of controlled aggression and absolute purpose. James could see why Thorn hadn't tried to run. One wrong move, and Shadow would be on him instantly. "Drop the weapon," James commanded, his own gun trained steadily on Thorn. "It's over. We found your victims, found your trophies. There's nowhere left to run." Thorn's face twisted into something inhuman. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I saved them from themselves, from their waste of potential. They needed guidance, needed discipline." His voice took on a fanatic's intensity, just like she did. The pieces suddenly clicked in James's mind. "Catherine Reynolds," he said, watching Thorn's reaction. "The girl who died in the mill fire. She wasn't just another victim, was she? She was the first." Thorn's eyes glazed with remembered obsession. "She had such potential. I watched her for months, saw how she was wasting her life. I could have helped her, taught her, made her understand, but she fought back. The fire." His scarred hands flexed around the pipe. The fire wasn't supposed to happen. Shadow's growl deepened, as if the dog understood the weight of Thorn's confession. The Belgian Malinois took a single step forward, causing Thorn to press himself flatter against the wall. "This dog," James said, a theory forming. "He's not just any stray, is he? He was there that night at the mill. That's why he's been watching the station, why he led us here. He witnessed everything." Thorn's eyes darted to Shadow, recognition and hatred warring in his expression. "The security guard's dog," he spat, "always nosing around, getting in the way. Should have dealt with him when I had the chance." The tactical team had moved into position, covering every possible escape route. James kept his voice steady, buying time for them to complete their containment. What happened to his handler? Fool tried to play hero when he caught me with Catherine. Got in the way like his mutt. Thorn's voice dripped with contempt. The fire took care of him. But that damn dog survived, disappeared into the woods, kept showing up at the worst times, watching, always watching. Shadow's ears flattened against his skull, his teeth bared in a silent snarl. In that moment, James saw the full weight of the dog's mission, not just finding Jennifer, but bringing down the man who had killed his handler, who had gone on to hurt others while Shadow waited and watched, gathering evidence in his own way. "Last chance," James announced, hearing the tactical team complete their positions. "Drop the weapon. Don't add assaulting an officer to your charges." For a moment, it seemed Thorne might comply. His shoulders sagged slightly, the pipe lowering, a fraction of an inch. Then his eyes hardened, and he lunged forward with shocking speed, the sharpened end of the pipe aimed at James's throat. Shadow moved like lightning, launching himself at Thorne's weapon arm. The pipe clattered to the ground as dog and man went down in a tangle of limbs and snarls. Before the tactical team could intervene, Shadow had Thorne pinned, powerful jaws, locked around the killer's forearm with precisely controlled pressure, enough to hold, not enough to maim. The arrest happened quickly after that, as the tactical team secured Thorne and began leading him out of the tunnels. James knelt beside Shadow. The dog released his guard position and turned to James, intelligence and exhaustion warring in his eyes. "Good boy," James said softly, running his hands over Shadow's coat, checking for injuries. "You did it. You got him. Your handler would be proud." Shadow pressed his head against James's chest, some of the rigid purpose finally leaving his body. They stayed like that for a moment, man and dog connected by the weight of justice served and missions completed. Above ground, the scene had transformed into a full-scale investigation. Multiple agencies had arrived, evidence teams preparing to process what was already being called one of the largest serial killer cases in the state's history. Jennifer Chen's parents had arrived at the hospital, their tearful reunion a bright spot in the darkness of the case. Assistant. Dawn broke over Riverdale Memorial Hospital, painting the sterile hallways with soft golden light. James sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his uniform wrinkled from the long night, while Shadow lay vigilant at his feet. The Belgian Malinois hadn't left his side since they'd emerged from the tunnels, as if some unspoken bond had been forged in the darkness. Beneath the city, Dr. Sarah Matthews approached them, her white coat swishing softly as she walked. Her face carried the weary satisfaction of someone delivering good news after a difficult night. "Jennifer's going to make a full recovery," she said, keeping her voice low in the quiet corridor. "Dehydration, mild hypothermia, some cuts and bruises, but nothing permanent. She's asking to see you both." Inside the hospital room, Jennifer sat propped up against white pillows, an IV line running into her arm and monitors beeping steadily beside her. Her parents dozed in chairs by the window, exhausted but unwilling to leave their daughter's side. When Shadow padded quietly to her bedside, her face lit up with the first real smile since her rescue. "My hero," she whispered, reaching out to scratch behind the dog's ears. Shadow leaned into her touch, his tail wagging gently. "Both of you," she added, looking up at James, "but especially this brave boy. I heard him, you know, during those days in the dark. He would scratch at the trapdoor, whine, try to dig his way in. It gave me hope, knowing someone knew I was there." James watched the interaction, pieces of the puzzle still falling into place in his mind. "Shadow's been watching that area for months," he explained. "Ever since the mill fire. He must have tracked Thorne's movements, learned his patterns. When Thorne took you, Shadow knew he needed help to get to you." The door opened quietly as Rachel Martinez entered, her notepad in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to get an official statement," she said. "And there's something else you should see, Wilson." In the hospital corridor, Rachel pulled out her tablet, bringing up a file. "We ran Shadow's details through the K9 database. His full name is Shadow of Justice, trained by elite K9 services for private security work. His handler, Michael Collins, was working night security at the paper mill when the fire happened. Collins was reported missing that night, presumed dead in the fire, but his body was never found. The image on the tablet showed a younger Shadow, with his handler both looking proud and professional in their security uniforms. The bond between them was evident even in the still photograph. The interesting part, Rachel continued, is that Shadow wasn't just any security dog. He was specially trained in evidence detection and human tracking. Collins had invested his life savings in that training, hoping to eventually transition to police work. James felt Shadow press against his leg, as if offering support as they learned about his past. So, when Collins confronted Thorne that night, Shadow was there, Rachel confirmed. According to Thorne's confession, Collins caught him with Catherine Reynolds. There was a struggle. The fire started, whether by accident or design is still unclear. Collins was either killed or incapacitated, but Shadow escaped. Instead of running away, he stayed in the area, gathering evidence, watching Thorne, waiting for a chance to bring him to justice. The weight of Shadow's mission settled over James. For months, the dog had carried the burden of his handler's death, watching as Thorne continued his crimes, unable to stop him alone. When Jennifer was taken, Shadow had known he needed human help to save her before it was too late. "There's more," Rachel said, scrolling through her notes. The complete search of the tunnel system revealed a hidden chamber we missed initially. Inside, we found human remains. Preliminary DNA testing confirms it's Michael Collins. Shadow's ears drooped slightly, but his posture remained proud. After all these months, his handler would finally be laid to rest properly with the dignity he deserved. "The district attorney is building the case now," Rachel continued. "Between Jennifer's testimony, the evidence from the tunnels, and Thorne's confession, he's looking at multiple life sentences, no chance of parole." The hospital intercom crackled with routine announcements as they stood in the quiet corridor, absorbing the magnitude of what Shadow had accomplished. The dog had not only saved Jennifer, but had brought down a serial killer and solved the mystery of his handler's disappearance. Chief Parker appeared at the end of the hallway, his face showing the strain of the long night, but also a hint of satisfaction. "Wilson," he called, gesturing for James to join him. Shadow followed naturally, as if he'd been part of their unit all along. "Hell of a night," Parker said, running a hand through his grey hair. "Hell of a case. The brass is already talking commendations, maybe even reopening your tactical status if you're interested." He paused, looking down at Shadow. "But first, we need to discuss him." James felt his chest tighten. After everything that had happened, the thought of Shadow being taken away seemed wrong on a fundamental level. "Technically, he belongs to elite K9 services," Parker continued, "but I just got off the phone with their director. Given the circumstances and Shadow's obvious bond with you, they're willing to transfer his ownership to the department." A smile cracked through his professional demeanor. "Congratulations, Wilson. Looks like you're getting a partner." The implications took a moment to sink in. "Sir, are you saying—" "Our K9 unit could use an experienced dog," Parker said. "And Shadow's already proven himself more capable than half my detectives. Of course, you'll both need to complete the official certification program, but given your tactical background and his training—" He shrugged. "Should be a formality." Shadow's tail wagged once, his eyes bright with intelligence as he looked between the two men. James felt something shift inside him, a piece of himself he'd thought lost forever clicking back into place. This wasn't just about giving Shadow a new home or adding to the K9 unit. This was about second chances, about honoring the bond between handler and dog that had reached beyond death to achieve justice. The morning sun had risen fully now, streaming through the hospital windows and casting long shadows in the corridor. In its light, James could see the subtle silver starting to show around Shadow's muzzle, evidence of the months he'd spent on his solitary mission. Yet there was nothing tired about the dog's bearing as he sat at attention, ready for whatever came next. A nurse hurried past them, pausing briefly to smile at Shadow before continuing her rounds. From Jennifer's room came the soft sounds of her parents' voices as they fussed over their recovered daughter. Somewhere in the building, a baby cried its first breaths of life. The world continued turning, but for James and Shadow, something profound had changed. "What do you say, boy?" James asked softly, kneeling to meet Shadow's gaze, ready to make it official. Shadow's response was to press his forehead against James's chest, just as he had in the tunnels after Thorne's capture. The gesture carried the weight of shared purpose, of trust earned in darkness and solidarity forged through justice. This was more than a new beginning. It was the continuation of a legacy, a promise to honor the memory of Michael Collins by carrying on his work. The transition from patrol officer to canine handler brought changes to James's life that he hadn't anticipated. His small apartment near downtown Riverdale suddenly felt more like home, with Shadow's presence filling the quiet spaces. The Belgian Malinois adapted to domestic life with the same intelligence he'd shown during the investigation, though his training remained evident in everything he did. Each morning began before dawn, Shadow's gentle whine pulling James from sleep right as the first hints of light touched the horizon. Their morning runs took them through pine grove trails, but the paths that had once held darkness now felt different. Shadow moved with an easier grace, his mission complete, though his alertness never wavered. The K9 certification program proved more challenging than either of them expected, not because of the tasks themselves, but because Shadow's previous training sometimes conflicted with police protocols. The instructor, Mark Davidson, a veteran, K9 officer with 20 years of experience, found himself constantly adjusting his teaching methods. "Never seen anything like it," Davidson admitted one afternoon, watching Shadow navigate a complex tracking exercise. "He's got high-end private security training layered over military-grade protection work. Collins must have spent a fortune on his education." The instructor shook his head in admiration as Shadow completed the course in record time. "We're not just retraining him, we're learning from him." The other handlers in the program watched with a mixture of respect and envy as Shadow demonstrated capabilities beyond their usual training scope. His evidence detection skills proved particularly impressive, combining scent work with an almost intuitive understanding of human behavior. During one exercise, Shadow located a hidden cache of evidence that even the instructor had forgotten about, leftovers from a training session months earlier. The discovery led to a complete revision of their search protocols, incorporating some of Shadow's techniques. James found himself rediscovering his own tactical skills as he worked with Shadow. The precision and focus required for K9 work awakened. Muscle memories from his SWAT days, but tempered now with a new sense of purpose. The weight of his past decisions felt lighter somehow, balanced by the trust Shadow placed in him. Their first official call came on a wet Tuesday evening. 3 weeks into the training program, a 9-year-old boy had wandered away from a camping site at Riverdale Lake Park. The parents, distracted by setting up camp, hadn't noticed his absence until the sun began to set. James and Shadow arrived to find the park's parking lot filled with emergency vehicles, their lights painting the rain-slicked asphalt in alternating red and blue. The boy's mother clutched her son's jacket, tears mixing with the light drizzle on her face. Shadow took one sniff of the jacket, and immediately turned toward a trail leading away from the campground. His body language told James everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was real. They moved through the gathering darkness, Shadow's nose working the wet ground as he followed the boy's scent. The rain complicated the tracking, washing away evidence with each passing minute, but Shadow seemed undeterred. His training with Collins proved invaluable as he adapted to the challenging conditions. The trail led them away from the marked paths, following what appeared to be a game trail deeper into the woods. James kept his flashlight beam low, watching Shadow's body language for signals. The dog suddenly picked up speed, his tail raising. Slightly, a sign he'd caught a stronger scent. They found the boy huddled under a fallen tree, cold and scared, but otherwise unharmed. His face lit up at the sight of Shadow, fear forgotten as the Belgian Malinois gently approached, offering warmth and comfort, while James radioed their location. The boy's parents arrived with the rescue team, their gratitude overwhelming as they hugged their son. Shadow accepted their thanks with dignified grace, maintaining his professional demeanor even as the boy's mother tried to sneak him treats from her pocket. Back at the station, Chief Parker called them into his office. The successful rescue had drawn media attention, and the chief wanted to discuss their role in the department's public relations. James noticed a familiar photo on Parker's desk, Shadow and Collins in their security uniforms. Michael Collins would be proud, Parker said, following James's gaze to the photograph. His investment in Shadow's training is paying dividends none of us could have imagined. The brass is talking about expanding our K9 program, using Shadow's capabilities as a model. James watched as Shadow settled into a perfect sit beside his chair, ever the professional. The dog's dark eyes held a wisdom that seemed to transcend his training, a depth of understanding that came from months of solitary vigilance and unwavering dedication to justice. The next few weeks brought more calls, each one helping to cement their reputation within the department. Shadow's ability to adapt his private security and evidence detection training to police work proved invaluable in various situations. During a particularly challenging case involving missing evidence in a drug trafficking investigation, Shadow's unique combination of skills led them to discover a sophisticated hidden compartment in a suspect's vehicle. The find not only secured crucial evidence, but also revealed a new smuggling technique that had been stumping law enforcement across 3 states. One evening, as they walked home through the quiet streets of Riverdale, James noticed shadows, attention drawn to the old paper mill in the distance. The building stood as a dark silhouette against the sunset, its broken windows like empty eyes staring down at the city. They changed course without discussion, making their way to the chain link fence that surrounded the property. Yellow police tape still fluttered from some of the posts, moving gently in the evening breeze. Shadow sat quietly beside James, his posture relaxed but alert. The mill had been scheduled for demolition, its dark history making rehabilitation impossible. Soon, this place, that held so many memories, both tragic and triumphant, would be reduced to rubble, making way for something new. A gentle whine from Shadow drew James's attention. The dog wasn't looking at the mill anymore, but rather at a small memorial that had been placed near the fence. Flowers and cards surrounded a photograph of Michael Collins, his smile bright and confident as he stood in his security uniform. Beside it, a smaller photo showed Catherine Reynolds, her young life cut tragically short. James knelt beside Shadow, placing a hand on the dog's shoulder. "You honored them both," he said softly. "You finished what Collins started, found justice for Catherine, saved Jennifer, saved all of us in a way." Shadow leaned against him, offering the same silent support he'd given that night in the tunnels. As they sat together in the growing, Darkness, James reflected on how their partnership had evolved. Shadow wasn't just a highly trained K9 or a replacement for his tactical team. He was a bridge between past and present, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with time and purpose. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Jennifer Chen stood there, looking healthier than she had in the hospital, though her eyes still held shadows of her ordeal. She carried a small bouquet of flowers, which she placed carefully at the memorial. "I hoped I'd find you both here," she said, reaching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. "I wanted to thank you again and to say goodbye. I'm heading back to medical school next week. After everything that happened, well, it made me more certain than ever that I want to help people." Shadow's tail wagged gently as Jennifer spoke, his eyes watching her with the same intelligence that had led him to save her life. James saw in her face the same determination. He'd discovered in himself the desire to transform trauma into purpose. "You'll make an excellent doctor," James said, meaning it. "Shadow and I will expect updates on your progress." Jennifer smiled, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her composure. "I owe you both my life, but more than that, you showed me that even in the darkest places there's always hope. Always someone watching, waiting to help." Spring had fully arrived in Riverdale, bringing new energy to the streets and a fresh sense of purpose to the North Precinct. James and Shadow's reputation had grown beyond simple search and rescue operations. Their unique partnership caught the attention of neighboring departments, leading to requests for their assistance in complex cases. The morning sun filtered through the precinct windows as Chief Parker briefed them on their latest assignment. A series of sophisticated burglaries had plagued the wealthy neighborhoods of 3 adjacent counties. The thieves left no traces, disabled security systems with expert precision, and seemed to possess intimate knowledge of their targets' schedules. "What makes this case different," Parker explained, spreading crime scene photos across his desk, "is that they're not just after valuables. They're taking personal items, things with emotional significance, family heirlooms, photographs, children's artwork, items that can't be replaced." Shadow studied the photos intently, his nose twitching as he processed the information. James recognized the dog's focused expression, the same look he'd had when tracking Thorn through the tunnels. Something about this case had captured his interest. "The latest victim was Judge Sarah Montgomery," Parker continued. "They took her mother's wedding ring and her daughter's first ballet shoes. But here's where it gets interesting." He pulled out a security camera still frame. This was captured 2 days before the robbery. The grainy image showed a maintenance van parked across from the judge's house. Normal enough, except Shadow's reaction was immediate. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he stared at the vehicle. James leaned closer, noting details that might have escaped others. The van's logo was for a company called Heritage Home Services. Professional, unremarkable, but something about the placement, the angle of parking, struck him as deliberate. "Run background on the company?" James asked, already suspecting the answer. "Shell Corporation," Parker confirmed. "Created 3 months ago, perfect paperwork, all fake. These aren't ordinary thieves. They're professionals with resources and planning capabilities that suggest something bigger." Rachel Martinez entered the office carrying a thick file. "Got something interesting from the crime lab. Trace evidence found at 2 of the scenes, specialized carpet fibers used in high-end home theaters. The kind installed by Heritage Home Services," James finished. Shadow's ears perked forward, his body language shifting from alert to intensely focused. The investigation took them into the affluent neighborhoods surrounding Riverdale. Lake Shadow's evidence detection training proved invaluable as they examined recent installation sites. The dog's ability to distinguish relevant scents from background noise led them to discover hidden cameras and listening devices in several homes, all clients of Heritage Home Services. At each location, the pattern became clearer. The thieves weren't just stealing valuables. They were conducting sophisticated surveillance operations. Every target had some connection to the justice system: judges, prosecutors, prominent attorneys. This wasn't random theft, it was systematic intelligence gathering. Working late one evening, James spread case files across his desk while Shadow dozed nearby. The dog's ears suddenly twitched and he lifted his head, attention fixed on the window. Outside, a maintenance van identical to the one from the security photo rolled slowly past the precinct. James watched through the blinds as the van circled the block once, twice, then disappeared down a side street. Shadow was already at the door, every muscle tense with anticipation. This wasn't coincidence. They were being watched, just as they watched their targets. The next day brought another burglary, this time targeting District Attorney Michael Chen's home. The pattern was the same: disabled security, personal items taken, no obvious evidence left behind. But this time, they made a mistake. Shadow found it first, a small, torn piece of paper wedged between floorboards. Under UV light, it revealed part of a blueprint, showing what appeared to be a building's ventilation system. In the corner, barely visible, was a partial logo: Riverside Storage Solutions. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of town, a massive climate-controlled warehouse complex that catered to wealthy clients. James and Shadow arrived just as the sun began to set, the golden light reflecting off rows of identical steel doors. The facility manager's office was dark, but Shadow's behavior changed as they approached. His nose worked the air currents, picking up something that made his hackles rise. James radioed for backup, then tested the door. It opened easily, too easily. Inside, the office showed signs of recent occupation. Coffee cups still warm, computer screens still active. On one monitor, a security feed showed multiple angles of the precinct's parking lot. They'd found the surveillance hub, but where were the operators? A sound from the storage area drew their attention. Shadow took point, leading them down the long corridor of storage units. His training with Colin showed in every silent step, every careful pause to check corners and doorways. Unit 247 stood out immediately. While other doors were secured with standard padlocks, this one had a sophisticated electronic lock. More telling was the faint hum of active equipment coming from within. Before James could call it in, Shadow's posture changed dramatically. The dog spun around, placing himself between James and the approach of silent footsteps. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, dressed in black tactical gear. "Officer Wilson," one of them spoke, voice distorted by a voice modulator. "We've been expecting you. Your reputation with that remarkable dog precedes you." Shadow's growl was low and continuous, but he held his position, waiting for James's command. The speaker took a step forward, hands raised to show they were empty. "We could use someone with your skills," the figure continued. "Someone who understands that sometimes justice needs to operate outside official channels. The evidence we gather, the items we acquire, they serve a greater purpose." James kept his hand near his weapon, mind racing through tactical options. By stealing from law enforcement families, terrorizing their children, by exposing corruption, the speaker countered. "Every item we take connects to a larger investigation. Judges taking bribes, prosecutors burying evidence, attorneys selling information. The system is rotting from within." Shadow's ears flattened against his skull, his body coiled like a spring. James knew the dog was reading more than just body language. He was processing layers of information, just as he had during the Thorne investigation. "If you have evidence of corruption, there are proper channels," James said, though he knew reasoning would likely prove futile. The speaker laughed, a harsh sound through the modulator. "The same channels controlled by those we investigate. No, sometimes justice requires a different approach. Join us, Officer Wilson. You and your extraordinary partner could make a real difference." The tension in the storage facility corridor crackled like static electricity. James kept his eyes on the three figures while Shadow maintained his protective stance, muscles coiled and ready. The dog's training showed in his perfect form, not a hint of uncertainty or wasted movement. "Here's what's going to happen," James said, his voice steady. "You're going to surrender peacefully, and we'll process all that evidence you claim to have through proper channels. Let the system work as it's designed to." The leader's laugh echoed metallically through the voice modulator. "The system? The same system that let Robert Thorne operate for months while evidence disappeared from case files. The same system that buried complaints about the paper mill's safety violations before the fire that killed Catherine Reynolds." The words hit like physical blows, but Shadow's unwavering presence helped James maintain his composure. The dog's ears twitched slightly. He'd caught something the humans hadn't yet noticed. "We've been watching you both," the figure continued. "Saw how you handled the Thorne case. Your dog there, he understood justice needed to be served even when the system failed. He kept watching, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment, just like we do." James felt the subtle shift in Shadow's stance and understood its meaning. The dog had detected movement behind them, more players entering the scene. They were being surrounded. "Difference is," James replied, buying time as he processed tactical options. "Shadow worked to expose the truth, not terrorize innocent families. Those kids you traumatized, the personal items you stole. That's not justice, that's revenge." The leader took another step forward. "Sometimes the line between justice and revenge gets blurry. You should understand that better than most, Officer Wilson, after what happened with your SWAT team." The words died in the modulated throat as Shadow suddenly spun, his warning growl preceding the appearance of two more black-clad figures. From behind, the dog's position shift had been so smooth, so precise, that even James had to admire the tactical awareness Collins had instilled in him. "Last chance," James announced, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. "Whatever evidence you have, whatever corruption you've uncovered, we can handle it legally. No one else needs to get hurt." A new sound reached them, the faint wail of approaching sirens. The backup James had called for was finally arriving. The figures in black exchanged quick glances, their body language shifting from confident to uncertain. The leader's hand moved suddenly, reaching for something at their belt. Shadow reacted instantly, launching himself forward with controlled aggression. His training showed in the precision of his attack, not going for serious injury, but rather to disarm and disable. The other figures moved to help their leader, but James was already in motion. Years of SWAT training combined with months of canine work created a seamless response. He tackled the nearest attacker while Shadow kept the leader pinned, the dog's powerful presence preventing any further escalation. The storage facility erupted with activity as tactical teams breached both entrances, filling the corridor with controlled chaos. The suspects were quickly subdued, their masks removed to reveal faces that James recognized from law enforcement databases, former officers, all discharged for various infractions. The leader turned out to be former internal affairs investigator Alexandra Ross, dismissed 3 years ago after becoming obsessed with corruption allegations she couldn't prove. Her tactical gear concealed a USB drive containing years of surveillance data on judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials. As evidence teams processed the storage unit, they discovered the true scope of the operation. The stolen items hadn't just been trophies, they'd been leverage, used to pressure families into revealing sensitive information about ongoing cases and investigations. Shadow moved methodically through the unit, his evidence detection training leading them to hidden compartments containing more stolen property. Each discovery helped build a complete picture of how deep the conspiracy reached. Chief Parker arrived. On scene, his face grim as he surveyed the collection of evidence. "They weren't entirely wrong," he admitted quietly to James. "There is corruption in the system, but their methods, the harm they caused..." He shook his head. "They became what they claimed to be fighting against." James watched as Shadow indicated another hidden panel, this one containing files documenting years of alleged misconduct. The dog's dedication to finding truth, regardless of where it led, reminded him of why they'd become partners. "We'll investigate every allegation," Parker continued, "through proper channels this time. Set up an independent task force. Bring in oversight from state and federal levels. Do it right." The storage facility remained active through the night, as teams catalogued evidence and began the process of returning stolen items to their owners. James noted how Shadow paid special attention to the children's belongings, toys, artwork, small treasures that meant nothing to thieves, but everything to their young owners. Rachel Martinez approached with a tablet displaying preliminary findings. Ross's team had files on everything, including the paper mill fire. Turns out there really were safety violations that got covered up, complaints that disappeared, inspections that got altered. Shadow's ears perked up at the mention of the mill, his dark eyes showing that same intelligent focus that had led them through so many cases. The dog had known all along that justice was more than just catching bad guys. It was about uncovering truth, protecting the innocent, and doing things the right way, even when the wrong way seemed easier. Judge Montgomery arrived to reclaim her stolen items, tears in her eyes as she clutched her mother's wedding ring. She knelt to thank Shadow personally, understanding now why the dog's reputation had spread so far. "You know," she said, watching, "Shadow maintained his professional demeanor despite her attention. In all my years on the bench, I've seen how complicated justice can be. But your partner here, he seems to understand it better than most humans. Right and wrong might get murky for us, but for him, it's always clear." Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges as James and Shadow patrolled the quiet streets of Riverdale's historic district. The investigation into Alexandra Ross's vigilante operation had opened a Pandora's box of internal investigations, but today's focus was simpler: community policing in the neighborhood they'd helped make safer. The sidewalks were coming alive with early morning joggers and people walking their dogs. Shadow attracted admiring glances, his professional demeanor and distinctive canine vest marking him as more than just another dog. Children especially seemed drawn to him, though they'd learned to ask permission before approaching. Sarah Chen, a local coffee shop owner, waved them inside her establishment. The aroma of fresh pastries and brewing coffee filled the air. "Officer Wilson, Shadow, your usual?" She was already reaching for James's preferred dark roast and Shadow's special treat, a homemade dog biscuit she'd crafted specifically for her favorite canine officer. Shadow sat perfectly at attention, waiting for James's signal, before accepting the treat. His manners had become legendary among the local businesses, a testament to both Collins's initial training and their ongoing work together. The radio crackled to life, interrupting the peaceful morning routine. "All units, be advised, suspicious activity reported at Riverdale Elementary. Possible attempted child abduction in progress." James felt Shadow tense beside him, the dog's demeanor shifting instantly from casual to alert. They were only 2 blocks from the school. "Unit K9 responding," James radioed back, already moving toward the door. They arrived at the school to find chaos in the parking lot. Parents were arriving for morning drop-off, creating a traffic jam that complicated access to the scene. A teacher stood with a crying 3rd grader while trying to give details to another officer. Shadow's training kicked in immediately. Without needing direction, he began working the area, nose to the ground, processing the complex mix of scents. His body language told James everything. There had indeed been an unauthorized presence here, The teacher, Ms. Thompson, managed to provide a coherent account. A man had approached Emily, one of her students, claiming to be sent by her mother. Emily, remembering her stranger danger training, had demanded the family password. When he couldn't provide it, she'd run back toward the school, screaming for help. He drove off in a white van, Ms. Thompson added, her voice shaking. I couldn't see the license plate, but there was some kind of logo on the side. A tree, I think. Shadow suddenly pulled with purpose toward the far end of the parking lot. James followed, trusting his partner's instincts. The dog led them to a secluded corner where tire tracks marked a hasty departure. More telling was what Shadow found in the grass, a dropped business card for Evergreen Landscaping Services. The connection clicked immediately. Recent reports had flagged several suspicious incidents involving fake service vehicles in neighborhoods with schools. This wasn't an isolated attempt, it was part of a pattern. James radioed in the company name while Shadow continued working. The scene. The dog's evidence detection skills proved invaluable as he located more items the suspect had dropped in his hasty retreat. A cheap cell phone, and what appeared to be a list of local schools with their start times. Within hours, the investigation had expanded. The business card led them to a warehouse registered to Evergreen Landscaping, but the company itself was another shell, similar to the one Ross's team had used. This time, however, the motivation wasn't vigilante justice. It was something far darker. Shadow's behavior changed noticeably as they approached the warehouse. The dog's hackles rose, his usual professional calm replaced by barely contained aggression. James had learned to trust these reactions. Shadow wasn't just detecting evidence now, he was sensing active threat. The warehouse appeared empty at first glance, but Shadow led them confidently through the space, following an invisible trail that only he could detect. His nose led them to a false wall, behind which they discovered a hidden room filled with surveillance equipment and photos of local schools. The discovery launched a multi-agency operation. The attempted abduction at Riverdale Elementary wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger trafficking operation that had been targeting schools across 3 states. The fake service companies provided cover for surveillance and attempted abductions. As teams processed the warehouse, Shadow remained unusually agitated. His training held, keeping him focused and obedient, but James could read the tension in his partner's body. The dog's reaction to crimes involving children had always been particularly strong. The investigation expanded rapidly over the next few days. Shadow's evidence detection skills proved crucial as they uncovered more locations connected to the operation. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of how extensive the network had become. Late one evening, as they finished processing another site, Rachel Martinez approached with new information. Got a hit on facial recognition from the school's security cameras, she said, holding up her tablet. The man who approached Emily? He's got connections to similar cases in 2 other states. Shadow's ears perked up at the mention of Emily's name. The dog had formed a special bond with the young girl during their follow-up interviews, his gentle presence helping her feel safe enough to provide crucial details about the incident. The break in the case came unexpectedly during a routine patrol. Shadow suddenly altered their route, pulling James toward a seemingly abandoned strip mall. His behavior displayed the same urgency he'd shown during the Thorne case. Something was very wrong. Behind the defunct businesses, they discovered a white van matching the description from the school. Shadow's reaction confirmed it was the same vehicle. More concerning were the sounds coming from inside, muffled voices and what seemed like crying. What followed was a testament to their partnership and training. While James coordinated with tactical teams, Shadow maintained surveillance, his keen senses tracking movement inside the van. When the suspect attempted to flee, the dogs measured Response enabled a clean arrest without endangering any potential victims. Inside the van, they found evidence that broke the case wide open, detailed plans for more abductions, connections to trafficking networks, and most importantly, information that would help identify and rescue previous victims. The impact rippled through the community. Schools implemented stricter security measures, but more importantly, Shadow's role in cracking the case created an unexpected benefit. Children began seeing police dogs not just as law enforcement tools, but as protectors and friends. The weight of success from breaking the trafficking case brought unexpected attention to the North Riverdale Precinct. News vans crowded the parking lot, reporters eager to tell the story of the remarkable K-9 officer who had uncovered a multi-state criminal network. Yet Shadow remained unchanged by the publicity, his focus solely on the work at hand. Chief Parker's office had become a command center for the expanding investigation. Maps and photographs covered the walls, each new discovery adding to their understanding of how deep the operation reached. James stood by the window, watching Shadow interact with Emily and other children who had come to give their statements. The dog's presence had transformed the usually intimidating process of victim interviews. Shadow seemed to instinctively know which children needed quiet support and which ones needed playful distraction. His training with Collins had clearly included aspects of therapy dog work, adding another layer to his already impressive skill set. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, one hand buried in Shadow's fur, as she described details she had previously been too frightened to share. The attempted abductor had mentioned other children by name, suggesting long-term surveillance of the school. Each new piece of information helped build a stronger case. Rachel Martinez entered carrying fresh files, her expression tight with concern. "We've identified 3 more shell companies connected to the trafficking ring, all legitimate-looking. Service businesses, landscaping, home repair, cleaning services, perfect cover for watching neighborhoods and approaching children." James felt Shadow press against his leg, the dog's way of offering support when he sensed tension in his partner. The scope of the case had grown beyond anything they'd initially imagined, reaching into wealthy neighborhoods and school districts across multiple states. The investigation had revealed a sophisticated operation that preyed on communities' trust. The fake service companies had built reputations through actual work, becoming familiar fixtures in target neighborhoods. They'd used this cover to gather intelligence on family routines, school schedules, and security measures. Shadow's evidence detection skills proved crucial as they raided more locations. The dog had an uncanny ability to find hidden rooms and concealed documentation, leading them to discover a network of safe houses where victims were temporarily held. The breakthrough came during a seemingly routine search of another warehouse. Shadow's behavior shifted suddenly, his body language indicating he'd found something significant. Behind a false wall, they discovered a room filled with computer servers, the operation's digital hub. Tech specialists worked through the night, decrypting files that revealed the true extent of the trafficking network. The organization had connections to legitimate businesses, corrupt officials, and international crime syndicates. Each discovery painted a darker picture of how many children had been at risk. Emily's mother, Andrea Thompson, had become an unexpected ally in the investigation. Her background in cybersecurity proved valuable as they untangled the digital evidence. She worked closely with the tech team, her determination to protect other children driving her to help however she could. Shadow took a special interest in their work, often lying near Andrea's desk as she analyzed data. His presence seemed to help her focus, especially during late nights when the weight of what they were uncovering became almost too much to bear. The case attracted federal attention. FBI agents arrived to coordinate with local law enforcement, bringing resources and expertise that helped expand the investigation. They were particularly interested in Shadow's unique capabilities, studying his methods for possible implementation in their own K-9 programs. James watched as his partner worked seamlessly with the federal teams. Shadow's previous security training, allowing him to adapt quickly to new protocols and procedures. The dog's ability to switch between gentle therapy work with victims and intense evidence detection impressed even the most experienced agents. Late one evening, as they prepared to raid another suspected safe house, an FBI K-9 handler approached. "James, your dog's something special," she said, watching Shadow methodically check his equipment. "Most K-9s excel in one area, patrol work, detection, therapy, but he seems to understand exactly what's needed in each situation." The raid itself demonstrated this adaptability perfectly. Shadow located a hidden panic room where two recently abducted children were being held, then immediately shifted to a calming presence that helped the traumatized youngsters trust their rescuers. The evidence seized during the raid included financial records that exposed how the trafficking operation had maintained its cover. Legitimate businesses had been used to launder money and provide credentials for the fake service companies. The complexity of the scheme suggested involvement from someone with intimate knowledge of law enforcement procedures. Shadow's reaction to certain pieces of evidence caught James's attention. The dog showed particular interest in documents bearing the letterhead of a private security firm, one that specialized in providing protective services to wealthy families. The connection seemed almost too convenient. A security company with access to detailed information about potential targets, using that knowledge to help traffickers identify vulnerable children. Shadow's insistence led them to dig deeper into the firm's background. The investigation into the private security firm, Guardian Shield Services, opened new avenues of inquiry. Shadow's persistent interest in their documentation led James and the team to discover disturbing patterns. The company had provided security assessments for wealthy families across multiple states, gaining intimate knowledge of their routines, security systems, and especially their children's schedules. Guardian Shield's founder, Marcus Reynolds, had an impressive resume. Former military intelligence, specialized training in personal protection, and connections throughout the private security industry. His firm had built a reputation for thorough security assessments that seemed designed to protect clients, but Shadow's instincts suggested something far more sinister. The Belgian Malinois' behavior changed noticeably during surveillance of Guardian Shield's headquarters. His training allowed him to remain perfectly still for hours as they observed the comings and goings of employees, but his intense focus reminded James of how he'd watched Thorne's movements months ago. Technical analysis of seized computers revealed encrypted communications between Guardian Shield employees and known members of the trafficking ring. The security assessments hadn't just been about protecting clients. They'd been detailed. Intelligence-gathering operations, identifying vulnerable targets and weak points in family security. Rachel Martinez's voice carried barely contained anger as she reviewed the files. They used their position of trust to gather intel. Family, vacations, school events, daily routines, everything a predator would need to know. She spread photographs across the conference table, showing Guardian Shield employees conducting what appeared to be routine security surveys at various schools. Shadow moved methodically around the table, nose working over each photograph. He paused at one image, a low growl rumbling in his throat. The picture showed Reynolds consulting with school administrators, but in the background, partially obscured, was a white van identical to the one used in Emily's attempted abduction. The evidence was mounting, but Reynolds's military background made him a dangerous target. He had resources, training, and connections that could help him disappear if he suspected the investigation. They needed to move carefully, gathering enough proof to ensure a conviction while preventing him from destroying evidence or harming potential witnesses. Shadow's specialized training proved invaluable as they built their case. His evidence detection skills, honed by Collins and enhanced through their police work, helped them uncover hidden documents and digital storage devices during carefully planned raids of Guardian Shield's satellite offices. The real breakthrough came during a seemingly routine stakeout. Shadow's posture suddenly changed, his attention fixed on a luxury SUV pulling into Guardian Shield's parking garage. The aftermath of Reynolds' arrest revealed layers of corruption that even Shadow's keen instincts hadn't fully uncovered. Guardian Shield's client list included not just wealthy families, but influential political figures, judges, and law enforcement. Officials across multiple states. Each new discovery painted a more complex picture of how deeply the trafficking operation had embedded itself in legitimate society. James watched Shadow methodically search another Guardian Shield satellite office, the dog's focus unwavering despite hours of detailed work. The Belgian Malinois' evidence detection skills had proven crucial as they unraveled the company's elaborate network of shell corporations and hidden assets. Andrea Thompson's cybersecurity expertise continued yielding results as she decoded more of Guardian Shield's encrypted files. The hidden surveillance software hadn't just gathered data on potential victims, it had collected compromising information on powerful figures, creating an insurance policy of blackmail material that had helped protect the operation for years. Shadow's behavior changed noticeably when they discovered a series of videos hidden in Reynolds' private servers. The footage showed Guardian Shield employees conducting what appeared to be routine security surveys at schools. But the dog's reaction suggested something more sinister. His training allowed him to maintain his professional demeanor, but James recognized the tension in his partner's body. The videos revealed a methodical approach to selecting targets. Security assessments had been used to identify not just vulnerable children, but also school staff members who might be manipulated or coerced into cooperation. Guardian Shield had created detailed psychological profiles of potential accomplices, using financial troubles or personal secrets as leverage. Rachel Martinez coordinated with FBI analysts as they mapped the full scope of the operation. Shadow moved between workstations, his presence seeming to help the investigators focus during long hours of reviewing disturbing evidence. The dog's calm energy had become essential to maintaining morale as the case grew increasingly dark. Late one evening, as they processed another batch of seized documents, Shadow suddenly abandoned his usual methodical search pattern. The dog's behavior shifted to the intense focus James had learned to trust implicitly. Following his partner's lead, they discovered a hidden safe containing what appeared to be insurance files, detailed dossiers on everyone involved in the trafficking operation. The files revealed that Reynolds had maintained leverage over every member of his organization, from low-level operatives to highly placed collaborators. The security expert had created a fail-safe system, ensuring that if he ever faced prosecution, he wouldn't go down alone. Emily's testimony had become crucial to understanding how the operation approached potential victims. Her clear recollection of the attempted abductor's words and behavior helped investigators identify patterns in other cases. Shadow stayed close to her during these sessions, his protective instinct evident in every movement. Chief Parker's office became a hub of activity as multiple agencies coordinated their response to the growing scandal. Shadow lay alert but calm in the corner, his presence somehow helping to diffuse tensions between competing jurisdictions and agencies. The dog's focused demeanor reminded everyone of their common purpose, protecting children and bringing predators to justice. James noticed how Shadow paid particular attention when they discussed the security company's training protocols. The dog's own extensive training with Collins seemed to give him unique insight into how Guardian Shield had operated, helping them understand the sophisticated methods used to maintain their cover. The investigation led them to a private compound outside the city where Guardian Shield conducted its employee training. Shadow's behavior became increasingly alert as they approached the facility, suggesting this location held special significance. The dog moved with the same purposeful intensity he'd shown during the Thorn investigation. Inside the compound, they discovered training materials that revealed the true nature of Guardian Shield's operation. The company hadn't just been a cover for trafficking. It had been actively training operatives in surveillance, manipulation, and exploitation techniques. Shadow's evidence detection skills proved invaluable as they uncovered hidden documents and electronic devices throughout the facility. The technical aspects of the security company's operation proved staggering in their complexity. Andrea's analysis revealed that Guardian Shield's legitimate security systems had been designed with deliberate vulnerabilities, allowing the company to bypass them at will. The same technology meant to protect children had been used to make them more vulnerable. As they delved deeper into the company's operations, Shadow's behavior suggested they were still missing something crucial. The dog's training allowed him to indicate subtle differences in scents and materials, leading them to discover a sophisticated communication system hidden within the compound's infrastructure. The hidden system revealed connections to similar operations in other countries, suggesting Guardian Shield was part of a larger international network. Shadow's persistence in searching specific areas helped them uncover evidence of communication with trafficking organizations across multiple continents. Rachel Martinez burst into the investigation room, clutching a newly decoded file from Guardian Shield's servers. Her face showed a mix of triumph and concern as she spread satellite images across the table. Shadow immediately approached, his nose working over the photographs with focused intensity. The images revealed a network of private airstrips scattered across remote areas, each registered to different shell companies, but all connected to Guardian Shield's operation. These weren't just escape routes, they were transport hubs for an international trafficking network that reached far beyond their initial investigation. James watched Shadow's reaction to each photograph, noting how the dog's behavior changed. When certain locations appeared, the Belgian Malinois' training allowed him to maintain his professional demeanor, but his subtle signals told James they were onto something significant. Andrea Thompson's voice crackled over the secure line as she reported her latest findings. Guardian Shield security software hadn't just been installed in clients' homes. It had been integrated into airport security systems, border control stations, and shipping terminals. The company had created a shadow network for moving victims across international boundaries. Shadow's ears perked forward as tactical teams prepared for simultaneous raids on multiple airstrips. The dog's previous security training proved invaluable as they planned their approach to each location. His ability to detect hidden spaces and concealed evidence would be crucial in documenting the full scope of the operation. The raids revealed more than they'd anticipated. Each airstrip housed sophisticated surveillance equipment and communication systems. Shadow moved through the facilities with purpose, leading them to hidden rooms where documentation revealed flight patterns, contact, protocols, and lists of international collaborators. FBI analysts worked through the night, coordinating with international law enforcement as the scale of Guardian Shield's operation became clear. Shadow maintained his vigilant presence, moving between workstations as if understanding the importance of each new discovery. Emily's mother had become an integral part of the investigation team, her cybersecurity expertise helping to unravel the technical aspects of Guardian Shield's network. Shadow stayed close to her as she worked, his protective instinct extending to this woman who had become crucial to their mission. The dog's behavior changed dramatically when they discovered a set of encrypted files labeled Project Legacy. His training allowed him to maintain position, but James recognized the intensity in his partner's stance. This was something significant. Breaking the encryption revealed Guardian Shield's ultimate plan. The company hadn't just been trafficking children, they'd been building a network of compromised officials and infrastructure that would allow them to operate with impunity across multiple countries. A sense of urgency filled the command center as teams processed the newly discovered project. Legacy files. Shadow moved between the workstations with heightened alertness, his body language suggesting imminent danger rather than past evidence. Something in these files pointed to active threats, not just documented crimes. Technical analysts worked feverishly to decode more details from the encrypted data. Project Legacy wasn't just a plan, it was already in motion. Guardian Shield had planted operatives in key positions throughout law enforcement, border control, and child protective services across multiple countries. James noticed Shadow's attention repeatedly drawn to one particular screen, where surveillance footage showed recent activity at several of the private airstrips. The dog's training allowed him to maintain his professional composure, but his subtle signals told James that time was running out. Andrea's voice cut through the tension as she made another breakthrough. "These aren't just flight plans," she announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're coordinated extraction protocols. Guardian Shield is activating their network. They're planning to move multiple targets within the next 48 hours. Shadow's reaction confirmed their worst fears. The dog moved to the tactical planning board with the same urgency he'd shown during Jennifer's rescue. His previous security training seemed to give him an innate understanding of the operational timeline they faced. Rachel Martinez quickly coordinated with international task forces, preparing for simultaneous interventions across multiple jurisdictions. Shadow remained focused on the operational maps, his behavior suggesting specific locations required immediate attention. The scope of Project Legacy became clearer as they decoded more files. Guardian Shield had created a self-sustaining network that could continue operating even if key leaders were arrested. Each compromised official, each corrupted system, had been carefully chosen to ensure the operation's survival. Emily's previous testimony began to make more sense in light of the new evidence. The attempted abduction at her school hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been a test run for a larger operation planned for multiple schools across different countries. Chief Parker mobilized every available resource as the urgency of Project Legacy's threat became clear. Tactical teams gathered in the precinct's underground garage, preparing for coordinated raids on multiple locations. Shadow moved among the officers with focused intensity, his previous security training evident in how he assessed their equipment and formations. The Belgian Malinois' behavior shifted noticeably when they brought in the latest intelligence photos. One image in particular caught his attention: a private aviation facility on the outskirts of Riverdale that had been dormant for months, suddenly showing signs of activity. Vehicles matching Guardian Shield's operational pattern had been spotted, entering and leaving at irregular intervals. Andrea Thompson's analysis of flight plans revealed a disturbing pattern. Small private aircraft had been filing seemingly routine flight plans that, when mapped together, created a network of connected stops across state lines and international borders. Each flight looked innocent in isolation, but Shadow's reaction to the combined data suggested something more sinister. Rachel Martinez coordinated with FBI tactical teams as they prepared to move. "We've identified 3 primary extraction points," she explained, pointing to locations on the digital map. They're using legitimate private charter services as cover, mixing their operations in with normal aviation traffic. Shadow's reaction to the flight manifests suggests they're planning to move multiple targets within the next 12 hours. James watched his partner process the operational briefing. Shadow's intensive training with Collins had included aircraft searches and runway operations, skills that would prove crucial in the coming hours. The dog's focused attention never wavered as tactical teams reviewed their assault plans. The command center erupted with activity as surveillance teams reported movement at all 3 targeted locations. Shadow's body language changed subtly, his muscles tensing as radio traffic confirmed their worst fears. Guardian Shield was initiating their extraction protocol ahead of schedule. Time seemed to compress as multiple operations launched simultaneously. Shadow led their team through the private aviation facility's security perimeter, his previous experience with similar locations evident in how he navigated the complex. His nose worked constantly, processing layers of information that human senses couldn't detect. Inside the main hangar, they found evidence of recent activity. Maintenance equipment hastily pushed aside, fuel logs showing multiple aircraft, prepped for immediate departure. Shadow moved with increased urgency toward a seemingly solid wall, exhibiting the same behavior that had helped them discover hidden rooms in previous raids. The concealed door revealed a sophisticated operations center. Multiple screens displayed real-time surveillance of schools, parks, and other locations where children gathered. Shadow's growl confirmed what they were seeing. Guardian Shield had been coordinating a massive, synchronized operation targeting multiple victims simultaneously. The concealed operations center contained more than just surveillance equipment. Shadow's focused attention led them to discover a hidden room filled with multiple children's backpacks, each tagged with detailed information about their intended owners. The Belgian Malinois' reaction confirmed these weren't just random items. They were props intended for multiple simultaneous abductions. James radioed the tactical teams positioned at other locations, relaying what they'd found. Shadow continued his methodical search, his training allowing him to process complex scenes without contaminating evidence. His behavior changed dramatically when they discovered a laptop still logged into Guardian Shield's secure network. Andrea Thompson connected remotely to the system, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she worked to extract critical data before it could be wiped. Shadow stayed close to the laptop, his body language suggesting there was more to be found. In its contents, the dog's previous experience with electronic evidence detection proved invaluable as they raced against time. The computer contained detailed execution plans for Project Legacy's final phase. Guardian Shield had coordinated with corrupted officials to ensure multiple children would be removed from schools simultaneously, using forged emergency custody orders as cover. The operation was designed to create confusion and overwhelm law enforcement response capabilities. Rachel Martinez's voice crackled over the radio as her team reported similar discoveries at their location. Shadow's ears perked up at the mention of specific times and locations. The operation was set to begin during afternoon dismissal at schools across 3 states. The technical team worked frantically to decode more details as Shadow led them to another hidden compartment. Inside, they found corporate uniforms for various delivery services and school maintenance companies. Each uniform had been carefully selected to allow operatives to move freely through school security without raising suspicion. James watched his partner process the scene, noting how Shadow's behavior became more urgent when they uncovered documents relating to specific schools. The dog's ability to prioritize evidence had helped them prevent crimes before. Now it might help them stop multiple abductions before they began. Andrea's voice cut through the tension as she made another breakthrough in the computer files. Guardian Shield had created detailed psychological profiles of school staff members, identifying those who might be manipulated or coerced into cooperation. The profiles included personal information that could only have been gathered through long-term surveillance. Shadow's demeanor shifted suddenly as tactical teams reported movement at the secondary locations. The Belgian Malinois' training allowed him to maintain his focused search pattern while conveying urgency to his partner. Years of security experience had taught the dog to recognize when timing became critical. Multiple surveillance feeds lit up across the operations center's screens, showing Guardian Shield teams moving into position near targeted schools. Each operative wore legitimate-looking uniforms, carrying clipboards and work orders that would help them blend in with normal dismissal time activity. James coordinated with Rachel Martinez as she deployed response teams to each location. Shadow's previous work in similar operations helped them anticipate the traffickers' likely movements and establish effective containment perimeters. The dog's understanding of tactical positioning proved invaluable as they worked to protect multiple targets simultaneously. Andrea Thompson's analysis revealed the full scope of Guardian Shield's plan. The organization had spent months establishing cover identities and documentation that would allow them to remove children from schools under the guise of emergency custody transfers. Each false identity was backed by seemingly legitimate court orders and official paperwork. Shadow's attention focused intensely on one particular screen showing activity at Riverdale Elementary. The dog's behavior suggested something different about this location. Not just another target, but perhaps a key to understanding the larger operation. His previous experience with complex investigations had taught them to trust these instincts. The radio crackled with urgent updates as surveillance teams tracked multiple Guardian Shield vehicles converging on their targeted locations. Shadow's ears moved constantly, tracking each transmission while maintaining his focus on the evidence around them. The dog's ability to process multiple streams of information helped them coordinate their response effectively. Inside the operations center, they discovered detailed contingency plans for various scenarios. Shadow led them to a cabinet containing multiple sets of emergency response credentials: fire department, medical services, and child protective services. Each set had been carefully forged to withstand routine inspection. The atmosphere in the command center grew more intense as Shadow identified additional threats hidden within Guardian Shield's contingency plans. His focused attention revealed that the company had positioned backup teams near each target location, ready to create diversions or intercept law enforcement response units. Emily and her mother arrived at the precinct, bringing crucial information about school security protocols that could help prevent the planned abductions. Shadow's demeanor softened briefly as he greeted them, but quickly returned to his professional focus. The dog understood that Emily's knowledge of how Guardian Shield had attempted to take her could help protect other children. Tactical teams coordinated their positions as school dismissal time approached. Shadow's previous security training proved invaluable as they established surveillance points and response protocols. The dog's experience with complex operations helped them anticipate potential escape routes and countermeasures. Andrea's continued analysis of the seized computer system revealed that Guardian Shield had compromised school communication networks. They could potentially trigger false emergency alerts or disrupt normal security procedures. Shadow's reaction to this discovery prompted them to establish backup communication channels for their response teams. Rachel Martinez reported that Guardian Shield operatives had begun approaching their target schools, using various covers to gain access. Some posed as maintenance workers, others as delivery personnel or educational consultants. Shadow's attention focused on the surveillance feeds, his body language helping identify suspicious behaviors that human observers might miss. The operations center's screens showed multiple Guardian Shield teams moving into position simultaneously. Shadow's training allowed him to process these various threats while maintaining his search for additional evidence. His nose worked constantly, detecting subtle changes in the environment that might indicate new dangers. James watched his partner closely, trusting the dog's instincts as they had so many times before. Shadow's behavior suggested there was still something they were missing, some aspect of Guardian Shield's plan they hadn't yet uncovered. The Belgian Malinois moved with increased urgency toward a section of the operations center they hadn't fully searched. Behind a false panel, Shadow had identified, they discovered Guardian Shield's true command and control center. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from inside schools, evidence that their surveillance penetration went far deeper than initially suspected. The Belgian Malinois' reaction confirmed the severity of what they'd found. James immediately coordinated with Andrea Thompson, who began working to trace and disable the unauthorized surveillance systems. Shadow moved methodically through the command center, his nose identifying additional hidden compartments containing servers and communication equipment. Each discovery revealed more about how deeply Guardian Shield had infiltrated school security systems. Radio traffic intensified as tactical teams reported Guardian Shield operatives attempting to access schools using sophisticated counterfeit credentials. Shadow's ears tracked each transmission, while his body remained focused on searching the command center. The dog's ability to process multiple threats simultaneously proved crucial as the situation developed. Rachel Martinez's voice cut through the radio chatter, reporting that her team had intercepted 2 Guardian Shield vehicles approaching Riverdale Elementary. Shadow's posture changed at this news, suggesting there was more to this particular location's significance. His previous experience with the organization's patterns helped them anticipate their next moves. The command center's screens suddenly shifted, showing multiple emergency alerts being triggered at targeted schools. Guardian Shield had initiated their distraction protocols, creating chaos to cover their true intentions. Shadow's previous security training helped them identify which alerts were genuine and which were part of the traffickers' plan. Andrea's voice carried urgent concern as she decoded more of Guardian Shield's operational plans. The organization had embedded sleeper agents within school staff, people who had been carefully recruited and positioned months or even years in advance. Shadow's reaction to personnel files suggested he recognized some of the patterns from previous investigations. The screens erupted with activity as Guardian Shield's sleeper agents began activating simultaneously across multiple schools. Shadow's intensive training kicked in as he processed each new threat, his body language helping James identify priority targets. The dog's previous experience with complex operations proved invaluable as they coordinated their response. Technical teams worked frantically to counter Guardian Shield's digital attacks as their emergency alert system triggered lockdown protocols in several schools. Shadow's attention fixed on one particular screen, showing unusual movement patterns at Riverdale Elementary. His behavior suggested something different about this location, perhaps a key to understanding the organization's broader strategy. Andrea Thompson's analysis revealed that Guardian Shield had created a sophisticated network of synchronized operations. Each distraction, each false emergency, was precisely timed to create maximum confusion while concealing their true objectives. Shadow's nose worked constantly, detecting subtle clues in the command center that might help them unravel the organization's plans. Rachel Martinez reported multiple Guardian Shield teams converging on their primary targets, using the chaos of false emergencies as cover. Shadow's previous security experience helped them anticipate the traffickers' likely movements and establish effective countermeasures. The dog's understanding of tactical operations proved crucial as they worked to protect multiple locations. Simultaneously, the command center's surveillance feeds showed Guardian Shield operatives attempting to exploit the confusion, using forged emergency response credentials to approach schools. Shadow's reaction to specific individuals helped identify high-priority threats, his training allowing him to recognize patterns in their behavior that human observers might miss. James coordinated with tactical teams as they moved to intercept Guardian Shield's primary operation teams. Shadow's focused attention on the surveillance feeds helped them track the traffickers' movements and anticipate their escape routes. The dog's previous experience with similar operations guided their response strategy. The command center was suddenly plunged into darkness as Guardian Shield initiated what appeared to be a coordinated power outage. Shadow remained calm in the chaos, his specialized training allowing him to operate effectively in low-light conditions. Emergency generators hummed to life, casting the room in an eerie red glow. Through the backup systems, they watched as Guardian Shield operatives used the power disruption to begin their final phase. Multiple teams moved toward their targets with military precision, each member executing their role in what was clearly a well-rehearsed operation. Shadow's body language became increasingly urgent as he processed the unfolding threats. Rachel Martinez's voice crackled through static as she reported Guardian Shield vehicles attempting to breach school security perimeters under cover of the blackout. Shadow's ears tracked each transmission while his nose continued working the command center, seeking additional clues about the organization's plans. Andrea Thompson worked furiously to restore critical systems, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she fought to counter Guardian Shield's cyber attacks. Shadow stayed close to her position, his previous experience with electronic evidence detection helping identify which systems required immediate attention. The surveillance feeds showed chaos erupting at multiple locations as backup generators failed to activate according to schedule. Shadow's reaction suggested this wasn't a coincidence. Guardian Shield had somehow compromised the emergency power systems. The dog's training helped them identify patterns in the equipment failures that pointed to deliberate sabotage. James coordinated with tactical teams as they moved to secure vulnerable locations. Shadow's intense focus on specific surveillance feeds helped them prioritize their response, his previous security experience proving invaluable as they worked to protect multiple targets simultaneously. Through the emergency lighting, Shadow detected a new threat. His posture shifted dramatically as hidden panels in the command center began to open automatically, some kind of fail-safe protocol initiated by the power outage. The Belgian Malinois training kicked in as he alerted James to multiple compartments releasing what appeared to be gas into the room. James immediately ordered an evacuation of the command center, trusting his partner's instincts. Shadow led them through the thickening air, his nose working to find the safest path out. The dog's previous experience with hazardous environments proved crucial as they helped technical staff evacuate while securing critical evidence. Outside, Rachel Martinez reported that Guardian Shield operatives had begun using specialized vehicles disguised as emergency response units. Shadow's attention fixed on the tactical map as they identified multiple teams converging on their target schools. His previous security training helped them recognize the organization's transportation protocols. Andrea Thompson managed to secure a mobile command post working to restore access to critical systems from a safe distance. Shadow maintained his protective position near her workspace, his behavior suggesting there was still vital information to be found in Guardian Shield's networks. The dog's focused determination never wavered despite the escalating situation. The tactical teams reported that Guardian Shield had deployed some kind of signal jamming technology, disrupting their normal communication channels. Shadow's ears tracked the degrading radio transmissions, while his body language helped James coordinate their response using pre-established backup protocols. Through fragmentary surveillance feeds, they watched Guardian Shield teams attempt to exploit the confusion caused by their multi-layered attack. Shadow's previous experience with complex operations helped them anticipate the traffickers' likely next moves, his training allowing him to process multiple threats simultaneously. A shaft of morning sunlight pierced through the smoke and chaos of Guardian Shield's compromised command center. Shadow's focused determination never wavered as he led tactical teams through the complex maze of hidden rooms and secret passages. The Belgian Malinois' specialized training shone through as he methodically uncovered each new threat while helping secure vital evidence. Andrea Thompson worked furiously at the master control terminal, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she systematically dismantled Guardian Shield's communication network. Shadow maintained a protective position near her workspace, his keen senses alert for any counterattacks. The dog's previous experience with electronic evidence detection helped identify which systems posed the greatest threats. Rachel Martinez coordinated with international task forces as they moved to intercept Guardian Shield operatives across multiple locations. Shadow's ears tracked each transmission, while his body language helped James anticipate emerging threats. Years of security training allowed the dog to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, guiding their response to the organization's desperate final moves. Through the command center's remaining surveillance feeds, they watched as tactical teams breached Guardian Shield facilities in 3 countries. Shadow's reaction to specific locations helped them prioritize targets, his previous experience with trafficking operations proving invaluable as they worked to protect vulnerable children and secure crucial evidence. Emily's voice came through, clear on the secure channel as she helped coordinate responses at Riverdale Elementary. Months of working with the investigation team had transformed the young survivor into a powerful advocate for child safety. Shadow's tail gave a single wag at the sound of her voice, even as he maintained his professional focus on the operation. James watched his partner process the evolving situation, trusting the instincts that had brought them from those first nights tracking Thorne to this final confrontation with an international trafficking network. Shadow's mission had grown far beyond avenging Michael Collins. He had become a guardian in his own right, protecting those who needed it most. The dog's behavior changed suddenly as he detected movement behind a seemingly solid wall. Shadow's training kicked in as he alerted the tactical team to another hidden room. The panel slid open to reveal Guardian Shield's emergency escape route, complete with detailed evacuation plans and go-bags packed with false identification documents. Andrea's analysis of the seized computers revealed the full scope of Project Legacy. Guardian Shield hadn't just been trafficking children, they'd been building a self-perpetuating network designed to identify and exploit vulnerable youth across multiple countries. The organization had embedded operatives in schools, social services, and even law enforcement agencies. Shadow led them deeper into the facility's hidden levels, each new discovery adding to their understanding of how extensive the operation had become. The dog's evidence detection skills proved crucial as they uncovered caches of forged documents, surveillance equipment, and detailed files on potential targets. Rachel's team reported successful interventions at multiple schools, preventing Guardian Shield's planned abductions before they could begin. Shadow's previous work with similar operations helped them anticipate and counter the organization's tactics, saving countless children from their carefully laid plans. The command center's screens showed Guardian Shield operatives being arrested across 3 continents. their sophisticated network crumbling as international law enforcement moved in. Shadow's focused attention never wavered as he continued searching for additional evidence, his training driving him to ensure no threat remained uncovered. Emily and her mother coordinated with school administrators to implement new security protocols based on their experience with Guardian Shield. Shadow's gentle presence helped calm frightened children as schools were swept for surveillance equipment, and unauthorized access points were secured. The dog's behavior shifted noticeably when they discovered Guardian Shield's long-term planning room. Maps and documents revealed operations that had been in development for months or even years. Shadow's reaction to specific locations helped investigators prioritize which plans required immediate intervention. James coordinated with tactical teams as they moved to secure Guardian Shield's remaining assets. Shadow's previous security experience proved invaluable as they identified and neutralized potential threats, his training helping them maintain control of multiple situations simultaneously. The operation reached its climax as they breached Guardian Shield's executive offices. Shadow's focused aggression kept the organization's leadership contained, while tactical teams moved in for the arrest. The dog's presence seemed to remind everyone of why they were fighting: for the children who needed protection, for the families who needed justice. Andrea's continued analysis of seized data revealed connections to corrupt officials and compromised systems across multiple jurisdictions. Shadow maintained his vigilant watch as she worked, his previous experience with complex investigations helping identify which leads required immediate attention. The dog's behavior changed again as they discovered files detailing Guardian Shields. Infiltration of legitimate security companies. Shadow's reaction suggested these connections posed ongoing threats that would require careful investigation and monitoring. Rachel coordinated with international agencies to begin dismantling Guardian Shield's support network. Shadow's methods were studied and implemented by law enforcement teams worldwide, his unique combination of skills becoming a model for future operations. As evening approached, the scale of their success became clear. Hundreds of arrests had been made, countless children had been protected, and one of the largest trafficking networks in history had been exposed. Shadow's mission, begun on those dark nights watching Thorn, had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The old paper mill site, where Shadow's journey had begun with Michael Collins, was transformed into a specialized training facility for law enforcement K-9 units. The dog's legacy would live on through new partnerships between handlers and their K-9 partners, each trained to protect and serve with the same dedication Shadow had shown. Emily's testimony helped secure convictions against Guardian Shield's leadership, while her ongoing work with other survivors provided hope and healing for those affected by trafficking. Shadow's gentle presence during difficult testimony sessions helped witnesses find strength to share their stories. Andrea's expertise led to the development of new cybersecurity protocols designed to protect vulnerable youth from online exploitation. Shadow often visited her office, his calm energy helping her process the emotional weight of the cases they encountered. Rachel's task force expanded to coordinate international responses to trafficking threats, implementing lessons learned from their experience with Guardian Shield. Shadow's methods became standard procedure for K-9 units worldwide, his success inspiring new approaches to complex investigations. James watched his partner work with new handlers and their dogs, passing on the legacy of both Collins's training and their own hard-won experience. Shadow's dedication to protecting the vulnerable never wavered, even as his role evolved from active investigator to mentor and guide. The precinct established a specialized K-9 training program with Shadow as its cornerstone. The dog's unique combination of skills, from evidence detection to victim support, became the standard against which future police dogs were measured. As sunset painted the sky over Riverdale, James and Shadow walked their evening patrol route. The Belgian Malinois moved with the same purpose he'd shown since first appearing at the precinct steps. His mission evolved, but never truly complete. Together, they had proved that justice could be served with both strength and compassion. One case at a time, the community gathered to dedicate the new Michael Collins Memorial K9 Training Center, honoring both the handler who had given his life protecting others and the remarkable dog who had carried on his legacy. Shadow sat at perfect attention during the ceremony, his proud bearing reflecting the dignity of his service. Emily spoke at the dedication, her voice strong as she described how one dog's dedication had not only saved her life, but had helped protect countless other children. Shadow's gentle interaction with her after the ceremony showed the deep bond they had formed through their shared journey. The setting sun cast long shadows across the training center's grounds as James and Shadow made their final evening rounds. The Belgian Malinois moved with the same purposeful grace that had first caught James's attention all those months ago. His mission transformed, but his dedication unchanged. They paused at the memorial to Michael Collins, where Shadow gently placed his paw on the plaque bearing his former handler's name. The gesture carried the weight of promises kept and justice served, of lives saved and hope restored. As night fell over Riverdale, Shadow's legacy was secured not just in the lives he had saved or the crimes he had helped solve, but in the example he had set for others to follow. His journey from grieving guardian to protector of the innocent had shown that even the darkest moments could lead to light. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.